You're listening to the Actors Resource with Alice Kwan, a podcast for actors and improvisers with interviews from entertainment industry experts.
Today's guest is Jo Kelly, an acting coach that specializes in helping actors to connect with themselves and to unblock. Jo has spent the past 20 years coaching award-winning actors, mainly Owen Wilson, Gerard, Laura Spencer, Brittany Allen, Carlos Leal, but also singers, dancers, directors, and corporate executives in Paris, Madrid, Zurich, Toronto, Los Angeles, and New York. As a director, her first film won several awards. Currently, she is directing 2 documentaries, and she is developing 2 feature projects. So honored to have you, Jo, as a guest here on the Actors Resource Podcast. Okay, first question. Why and how did you first start acting and coaching actors?
Yeah, so actually I didn't start with acting. I have my MBA in economics and I specialized in a master's after that in human resource management. So basically that's like corporate therapy, right? So I was a corporate coach and kind of parallel / right after that, I started acting. And it seemed to me, coming from a coaching place and really understanding, so my education was a lot of psychology, I was realizing that whether I was taking a lot of classes because I was very, very eager and passionate, and I was seeing a lot of my acting colleagues, it felt like no matter how many classes people were taking, it felt like the suffering was always the same with actors. It's like I've never actually seen a profession where people study so much and are never or so rarely complete with their instrument and with actually how they act and feel good about it. And that was really curious to me. And coming from a coaching perspective, and I've always been in love with human beings, which is why I ended up being a corporate coach in the beginning. I was like, what is it with this profession, And I was also not really finding the food I was looking for in all the classes I was taking, and I was taking them everywhere. And, like I wouldn't say around the globe because that would sound pretentious, but I was traveling and, going to the best. And I was like, why is it? Like it felt like no one was capable to access their instrument, and everyone, apart from the exceptions, and everyone was frustrated when they were acting. I was like, this is so interesting. So I started doing my own, research, and I was fascinated by that because I was seeing talent in front of me, or I was feeling my own talent. And then I was feeling huge blocks, or I was seeing huge blocks in my friends and colleagues. So yeah, I started, scratching my head and going back to my initial education, and I started researching and developing a way to make sure that actors would just feel good when they act. It felt like I had to reverse everything, and what was out there in the education wasn't satisfying for me or for the people I knew. So yeah, that's how and why I started, actually, I guess. I just couldn't help myself to just help and figure something out. I felt like I had to.
When did you first start coaching actors? And has it changed much since you first started?
Well, it's become more and more specific, but I started, I would say, a little more than 20 years ago. And I think that the people who started with me and who are still working with me wouldn't say that it was different, but it's become extremely specific now. I was always against teaching actors because I believe that acting is just the art of being alive, and I'm really sure you can't teach that. And if you see kids when they act, they haven't taken a master class or a workshop, and they are the best actors because they are alive. So I guess that was always the case for me, but I just became more and more knowledgeable and experimented about finding ways and tools to help actors unblock and restore. It's actually, I feel like I'm helping actors restore their instruments. And sometimes I have singers and dancers and they come across the same thing, not as much as actors, but I would say most of the same frustration. It's really just restoring the instrument as it was meant to be. It was meant to be free and authentic, and actually the way that we're wired and the way that we're educated makes actors so judgmental about everything they feel. And so they're so trained to judge everything they feel that they end up not having access to their instrument, not being connected to what's there. And so that's the work that I'm passionate about, is really resetting, restoring. I don't do any of it. Obviously the actors do it. That's why I'm not a teacher. But I do have tools that work and a way of doing them that works. And that helps actors, be connected to themselves again and be comfortable with feeling whatever gremlins they're feeling.
It sounds a lot like 100% self-acceptance, no matter what you're feeling, and really getting into that and allowing that to be expressed. For our listeners that may be brand new to acting, could you define what you mean by instrument?
So the instrument is like if you would take any art, a painter would have a paintbrush and some colors, and a musician would have a guitar or a piano. And then if this is an art, what would be your instrument as an actor is your whole body, your physical impulses, your emotional impulses, your feelings, your thoughts. Your entity is what you're acting with. So if you don't have access freely and fast to everything that's there, it's like the painter who doesn't know where his brush is and where the paints are. Or like hidden, like Pollock, right, had a crazy studio where he would not find, he had so much paint everywhere that he could find it even if it was all, underneath a bunch of junk, but he had so much. But if you would have to look for the blue for 2 hours in order to paint the blue, you'd probably forget what you wanted to, enhance in your painting. So, yeah.
I think that may be the best definition I've ever heard for an actor's instrument. Being able to use your body and access all your emotions and being able to express them.
Exactly. Well, it's not that you judge yourself at the moment that you get the sides and the character and you're like, oh, he needs to be ashamed or whatever. Okay, so I feel like I do that. But if you don't have free access to your shame, if you're not comfortable being ashamed, how on earth are you going to be authentically giving something that's unique about you to your character in shame or anger or sadness? If you can't access for yourself, you're going to have to fake it for your character or push it. And that doesn't really work. And it's not satisfying when you do it. It really isn't. Yeah.
You talk about being fully alive. Is this what you mean?
Well, yeah. So coming back to the kids, there's that saying that if you put a kid on a stage, well, you can't, because if you put a kid on a stage, no one will watch the actors. They'll watch the kid because the kid is so alive, right? So that's why you can't teach actors, because if you teach, then inevitably there's a method or a way to do things in a proper way. And it's when you try to do things right that you're not alive. So I used to say I'm not for teaching. I'm a coach and I don't teach anything, but now I'm starting to be against teaching because I see the damage. I see the people who do so many classes and methods and techniques who end up in my office and going, please do something. I feel like there's been a brain transplant of methods and I have no access to my intuition, to my instrument, to what I want. They're so obsessed with doing things right and trying to pull all the tricks that they forget how to be alive. And when you're acting, I don't even call it acting anymore. That's why the name of my company is To Be or Not to Act. So for me, it's about being, just like a child when they play hairdresser or truck driver or whatever. They're not really acting. They're being that person. They're playing being that person. They're pretending that they're that person and they're believing it, but they're really being. So there's that level of it too, where once the instrument is free and is restored to what it's supposed to be, to how it comes to this earth in the first place, then you can become, if it matters to you and if there's a purpose for you in doing the work you're doing, then you can become the person and you don't have to act or be in an audition. You can just be a character who wants something and you try to get it. Yeah, and then it becomes really effortless.
So With that, do you prefer students that have already had acting training? Or is a brand new student to acting still able to really benefit from this approach?
Well, I'm happy when I have people walk in the office and they've never taken a class, because then it's so much easier. We don't need to undo anything. We can just, they're usually young by then and they're still in touch with their instrument and they haven't been told how to do it right. So less undoing to do. There's a lot of educational undoing and social undoing and all of that, but there's no acting undoing. So that's one thing that I would encourage people who haven't done any acting to jump into acting that way, not thinking they would have to study.
Now, what about this? What about learning lines? Memorizing lines with a traditional approach.
The lines, people have very different capacities. I coach some actors who literally read it once and know it.
Really? That's amazing.
Yes. So does Meryl Streep, by the way. Just a little, detail. And I know other actors that are so stressed about doing it right, they get so stuck on the lines. They're not lines. They're words that you're saying in response to a situation. So again, if you see it as a traditional discipline and something you need to learn, and there are lines that you need to have inside, you'll struggle with it. But if you just play with the words and experiment them and throw them on one side and throw them on the other side and yell them with rage and then say them in a sexy way and then say them in a pity way and just to have fun with it without trying to be right, your impulses will print them and you're remaining flexible. And when you're knowing what you're doing, you don't have to remember them. Your character will know them, because your character, if you're really present and listening to what your partner is telling you, and you've read it a couple times, you know what you're saying. So it's a kind of a different, kind of a mindset shift of approaching the memorization.
This just seems really scary, not knowing what your lines are going to be.
It's scarier. It's scarier until you've done it so many times that you know that it's the only pleasure that you can ever find is in that place of not knowing. Because then you're alive, then you're really involved and engaged, then you're really present, you're really there. Whereas memorizing and knowing how you're going to do your scene is just being a little puppet, and there's no pleasure in there and no impact for your audience or results in terms of being booked. Of course, you can get by sometimes and book a couple roles like that, but you can't make a lasting impression on not being fully alive, because people can recognize that now. They want real stuff. If not, it doesn't move them anymore.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you. What is the best thing that you think an actor should do for their instrument?
So there's no recipe answer to that. But yeah, the one thing I would definitely do is, like in any other discipline, is train every single day.
Oh, wow. Every day?
Yeah, like a dancer does, like a singer does, like a writer does. It's a muscle. And if you want to be emotionally raw, available, free, instinctive, and that's something you cannot do in the real world out there, well, you better make sure that muscle is trained and ready to go, because you never know when the big casting or the role or whatever is coming. And even if you're booked, you never know what scene you're going to shoot, because you might have a plan, but it will change. Now, there seems that they're liking a lot to give you the lines 10 minutes before. They keep rewriting till the last minute. So you better be super flexible and super trained, especially if you're very passionate. You cannot expect to just train before a project or just before an audition, because it goes fast and the pressure will make you shrink if you're not extremely trained, and then it's not going to be fun again.
Well, what kind of exercises can an actor do to train every day?
Well, depending on who's in front of me, we'll always figure out what specifically they need, because everyone is different. So if someone is extremely blocked They can do a lot of purging work. So, let me see an example that would be easy to explain. An easy purging exercise that we can explain fast. So I'm not sure if I will be able to kind of go through a whole exercise in a short amount of time, but any exercise that will let you go into the block. So writing about the block, really listening to it, sitting with it, tapping, for example, EFT is a great resource for that. To really, really get into the block and get comfortable with it. That's a good way to purge. Rather than trying to get rid of it, it's trying to get into it. And so if someone has a lot of blocks, I would definitely do some block work. And on my website, I think you'd be able to find some free resources or free webinars. I'll check on the homepage to make sure that there's something up there right now, but I can double check on that. And then people can really see an example of a purging exercise. There's so many and they're adapted to your unique circumstances, but there's some major global ones that can be helpful for anyone. So that, and then I would also always train the instinct. So that's really just exercises that will make you impulsive, instinctive, rather than heady. I think if you would just work on that, on purging your blocks and muscling up your instinct, you're on a very good path, because then you have your instrument back. It's like, trying to do a car race and your car is not well put together. Well, it has to be. I think we all have wonderful sports cars as instruments. We're all super Ferraris. But if the Ferrari hasn't been treated well for a while, it won't go very far. So if you just take care of the instrument that way, you just, clean it up, and make sure the tires are good and there's some gas in there, then you can start relying on it and trusting it.
Do you have any suggestions if an actor or any other creative person, for whatever reason, can't coach with you right now? Are there training exercises that a person can do by themselves?
Yeah, I'll make sure the webinar is easily accessible, or I'll send you a link so that maybe you can put it into your podcast, and then people can watch that and go through some training that they could do by themselves. Yeah, there's always more, of course. Like I usually take people through a whole journey of 30 days, more or less, so that they can, do that type of work consistently and specifically. But if you want to, do it by yourself, you can do that for sure.
Yes, I took your 33-day journey class. It was amazing.
Yeah, I'm glad you liked it.
And painful. Really painful, but good.
We had some purges and some blocks to take care of. So yeah, it's a little bit painful, and then it's like you break that wall, and it's so soft on the other side. Yeah.
How do we find out more about your approach to acting to help actors remove blocks and get unstuck?
Well, I think that watching the webinar, I'll make sure that there's a link. People can watch that. And my website is tobeornottoact.com.
And is there anything coming up that you would like to promote?
There's nothing specifically that I want to promote. I think that the webinar is self-explanatory. Not everyone wants to do that type of work, but if anyone is compelled to do it, if this makes sense, if it feels like it resonates when you're listening to this podcast, then yeah, try out the exercises on the webinar. And then, people can get in touch with me and we can see what I have available and what's going on that they can join if they want to do some work with me. Yeah.
And again, your website is www.tobeornottoact.com. And the word is to, not the number?
Yeah, all letters, no numbers.
Jo Kelly, thank you so much. You were wonderful, and it was just absolutely lovely having you as our guest.
Lovely having you too. Thank you, Alice. It was really fun.
And thank you for listening to the Actors Resource Podcast. Please shoot me an email and let me know what you think or questions you might have and get answers to. Thank you so much.